Good afternoon and welcome to the Yorkshire and Humber branch meeting. Thanks for joining us today. I can see people are just starting to come through now. We're lucky to have Heather, who is the branch chair and who works for Abby, and is going to be talking about international travel today. So straight into the presentation. Over to you, Heather.
Thank you very much, Julie, and thank you to those of you who have joined us this lunchtime to talk about international business travel for business travel safety. Now, I'm going to start with a story. We're just going to go straight in, story time. Now, we're going to talk about James. James is a field service engineer for a UK manufacturing company. He has been sent to Lagos in Nigeria for 10 days. He's going to be there, overseeing the installation of equipment at a client's facility. It's going to be his first time working in West Africa. Now, things don't go so well for James. He has had no pre-travel briefing. He received a last-minute flight booking and an itinerary, but he didn't get any safety induction. He didn't have any cultural awareness training. He didn't have any details on the local risks. He didn't get a company travel risk assessment or a personal safety plan. There were no checks done on what the current political situation is or whether it had become recently unstable, which it has due to local protests. His accommodation was arranged through a third party, but it hadn't been vetted for safety at all. It didn't have any fire exits. There was very patchy security and unreliable internet. James then fell ill. So he fell ill with a severe stomach issue on about day 4. He was unfamiliar with the local healthcare system and he had no support contacts at all. Local emergency numbers were unclear to him. He didn't have any clear health insurance instructions either. He tried to contact his manager in the UK, but no one was available. It was out of hours. He ended up relying on hotel staff to help him find a clinic, but the communication there was actually very difficult and payment was cash only. The incident wasn't logged. There was no follow-up by the company when he came back to the UK. His no well-being check was carried out and James felt unsupported, unsafe. He was reluctant to travel again. James did submit a grievance and the company did face some internal scrutiny, and they even had some reputational damage when the story got to the trade association and there was discussions at the national trade shows. He actually did leave the company. He cited poor employee care and a major failing in their international safety for travel. Now, James's story is not unique. It's not uncommon, unfortunately. We're seeing mixed feelings about business travel across all industries. A recent survey commissioned by the global travel risk management firm, they said in 2023 that actually 11% of employees are currently refusing international travel. They deem them to be unsafe. People are worrying about travel for work. They're looking at the headlines on a daily basis, so it's not hard to see why there is a lot of worry and a lot of uncertainty. People are worried about risks, potential travel disruptions, future disruptions on a global scale as well. 17% feel particularly unsafe, and 20% are only 20% are happy to travel, which is quite a staggering amount, isn't it? So we've got 80% of people that just don't fancy it anymore. They're not up for it. Whereas those of us who are back in the office are thinking, oh, look at them, they're off on a plane, going somewhere warm and sunny. See them when they get back. But there's a lot of concern. There's a lot of things that they're thinking about. There's a lot of political instability in the world, which is a significant risk factor and concern to many people at the moment. We've got lots of geopolitical threats that are unraveling at the moment, leading to sudden changes in security conditions. We've seen civil unrest in countries. We've seen disrupted transport networks, challenges in accessing healthcare and consular support. Only last year, 2024, we saw CrowdStrike IT outage, which cancelled thousands of flights, impacting over 1 million passengers. So we're facing significant travel disruptions as well. And again, that's really decreasing this employee appetite for international travel. Now, there are many concerns that employees have when they're thinking about travel. Travel advisories change rapidly due to evolving situations. There are certain regions that are considered higher risk due to political tensions and terrorism and anti-British sentiment as well. Think back to James, who was sent over to Nigeria, he was sent over to Lagos. Currently there, we're seeing reports of kidnappings and violent crimes. They're prevalent in various parts of the country. And currently the Foreign Office is advising against travel to certain states other than for essential travel. But are we checking that? As a business, are we checking that? Or are we just sending them off to meet a client and out of sight and out of mind? Turkey has recently seen terrorist attacks in major cities that we might once have considered perfectly safe and not given a second thought about. So we have to check the UK Foreign Office for the most up-to-date and most recent travel advice that they're giving. We don't want our teams, we don't want our staff to face the risk of terrorism or have that heightened threat because of anti-British sentiment that we have in some countries at present. There still remains general concern amongst travellers about COVID. I know in general anxiety has reduced around COVID-19 in some respects. It seems like a distant memory. It was 5 years ago, but it is still impacting the decision making of travellers that are travelling for businesses. And how could it not? It's not hard to recall those images of a global pandemic, those people that we saw stuck overseas or stuck in quarantine hotels, unable to get home to their families. It's still quite a raw and fresh memory for those that were out and about, that were travelling on business. We have other health risks as well that need to be considered. Think about West Nile virus, for example, which has passed its spread through infected mosquitoes. It's common in many areas now, whereas once upon a time we would have thought of it in Africa and parts of Asia and the Middle East. It's actually become endemic in North America and some parts of Europe, including Southern and Eastern Europe during those warmer months. Now, 80% of people who do contract West Nile virus, they won't have any symptoms. They'll continue on their day. But 1 in 5 will develop some symptoms. They'll maybe have fever, headache, body aches. And 1%, they will encounter some serious neurological illnesses. They could develop meningitis, for example. So we have to be aware of health risks, health concerns, viruses that we might be subjected to in certain areas that we might be travelling to. Malaria is another instance, another infection that we might pick up, again, spread through mosquitoes. We can see that 90% of infected business travellers were infected because they hadn't taken their medication. The recent study showed that people cited forgetfulness or not actually appreciating the requirement to actually take it. They hadn't had a proper briefing. They hadn't had the importance of this medication, this medical briefing before they left. They hadn't had health and safety training that explained to them, don't forget that, it's really important. You really don't want malaria. So 90% of infected business travellers not taking their medication to prevent the risk of malaria when travelling. We need to be providing team members with destination-specific information and make sure they're following best practice. The more information we give people, the better they can make their decisions and the better informed they are and the more likely they are to follow through. If they understand the risks and the consequences and the controls that we're putting in place, then they're much more likely to follow through, to take it seriously. That's all that we're asking. 80% of travellers developed Stomach upset. I think that's something that people are more familiar with when we talk about health risk and we talk about travelling abroad. They're thinking about what are they eating, how has it been washed, what was the water that it was washed in. So we appreciate that one, but we don't necessarily appreciate actually we really need to be taking our vaccinations and our pre-travel medical much more seriously. Most illness-related travel disruption is actually caused by pre-existing conditions. So things such as heart disease, diabetes, mental health conditions. But actually, only 43% of risk managers are asking for medical disclosure before people travel. And that's potentially leaving companies open to disruption when they should be considered as part of the business travel risk management strategy. If we know somebody has a pre-existing condition, it might impact whether we do send them to certain areas, but it also allows us as business leaders to put in extra controls to make sure they do have information that might help them along the way to decide whether are we really going to send them to somewhere with extreme heat, which they might be more susceptible to if they have this pre-existing condition. But only 43% are actually asking for that information before they send people abroad. It should be part of our strategy. It should be part of our assessment before somebody goes. We're not there to say no. We're just there to make sure that people can do things safely. That's all we're here for. We're finding solutions. We're seeing weather is having a big impact on health as well. We can see that there's been a 13% increase in cholera cases, which have been contributed to waterborne disease, been contributed to climate change. So that is having a big impact. Legionnaires is a big concern of people travelling in certain areas. Legionnaires disease being a serious lung infection that's caused by inhaling water droplets. Are we thinking about these things? Are we considering? Are we telling our teams that are travelling, our employers that are travelling, that these are the risks that they might encounter, but these are how we can control it. These are how we can make it better. Cyber is another area of concern. So when we're travelling, when we're going on abroad, then cyber is something else that we do need to consider as a risk, not just to ourselves, but to our businesses as well. Online attacks and software glitches can not only cause major travel disruption, so thinking back to the event of 2024, just last year, when we had that major travel disruption from the CrowdStrike IT, but it's also thinking about things of how is our data being captured? How is it being used? Attacks tripled, cyber attacks tripled in 2024 from the same time in 2023. So it's a rapidly growing threat. We need to be considering the threat landscape when we're thinking about cyber security, giving people the tools that they need, making sure that they have basic security measures on their devices, making sure that they're not sharing. I know it sounds really obvious, doesn't it? But making sure they're not sharing sensitive data with anybody. They're not giving out data over the phone with unknowns. So making sure they've got that awareness as well. When we're talking about travel safety, yes, we can think about health and we can think about the well-being, but it's all encompassing. We're thinking about everything that people might be subjected to and how that might impact them, including the cyber attacks, the cyber security. Natural risks are a big concern. Think about climate change. We've got a big increase. We can see only last year the floods that came out of nowhere in Dubai, and at least 20 people died in Oman and 4 in the UAE when those floods when they hit last April, something that nobody really saw coming. We had Mount Etna only yesterday erupted, impacting many flights and those that were in and around that area. So are we considering the weather conditions of where we're sending people? Are we considering the natural risks that are arising in these countries? Do we have a traveller checklist? Are we thinking about the sun index and sun protection and pollution as local conditions and risk factors that we're considering in our local risk assessments? Are we advising? Are we making sure our teams have the appropriate clothing, the appropriate PPE they're going to need when they're out in country? Have they taken into account the weather conditions? We have to also think about, extreme heat. 2024, sorry, was like the hottest year on record. And again, that can significantly impact travellers, especially if we've got those that do have pre-existing health conditions. They can be exacerbated by warm conditions. So again, yes, they should declare it before they go, but it's not us saying, well, you've told us about this condition, therefore you can't go. It's us saying, okay, how can we mitigate this risk? Is it that you don't go, or is it that we introduce more rest breaks, or ensure that you have the sufficient fluids and the right foods are being consumed and electrolytes and all of that? So we're always looking at the whole picture, making sure we can find solutions, we can support people. Employees have to understand what the destination is that they're going to. They have to have some awareness. And as employers, we have to make sure we're giving them that, we're providing them with that, because we have this duty of care. We have to ensure that we are doing that. We have to think about who we're sending when we're sending people on international travel. Women in particular, they will face some different challenges. They will feel perhaps a little bit more threatened when it comes to thinking about how they're dealing with travel. 71% of women actually felt less safe traveling for work than men. 31% said they wouldn't leave their hotel, they wouldn't go out alone due to safety concerns. But as an employer, as somebody who is responsible for people going abroad, how can I mitigate that? How can I put things in place to make female travellers feel safer? Can I offer private chauffeur services or booking hotels with specific security features, for example? And it's not just women in this instance. Are we thinking about our LGBT colleagues? If we're requesting they go to certain countries, we might be asking them to travel to countries that do have strong conservative beliefs. And are we making them aware of that? Are we giving them that information so that they can make informed choices about how they're maybe, whether they're at increased risk when they're in a much more conservative country? Are they aware of the local legal and social environment that they're actually heading into? So again, considerations that we have to take into account when we're thinking about the people that are going to be traveling to meet our clients, to be supporting our clients, to be working abroad for us and our company. Mental health as well can be a consideration when we're thinking about international travel. I'm not stood here to take the fun out of travel. I love traveling. It's good for positive personal development. It's fabulous. But we need to consider the impact that frequent travel can have, the tiredness, the stress, the loneliness, the anxiety, that feeling of homesickness at the end of the day. How are we managing that? Are we giving people time to decompress when they get back from travel? Are we just sending them straight on the next flight somewhere else, or straight to the next client at the top of the country, even if they're staying national? Are we giving them the time that they need to actually get over their journey, to come to terms with being home, with catching up with their family? The recent survey showed that 45% of business travellers would really appreciate it if employers checked in more regularly on work trips to support their well-being, actually checked in and said, how are you doing? Are you okay? Do you just need a chat? Do you need to decompress? And we have seen as well, through recent global support organisations, a big increase in travellers phoning for support when they are abroad. So we are seeing twice as many calls for advice, for assistance post-pandemic, to the global security assistance programs that offer mental health calls as well. So it is something that we do need to take into account. It does have an impact. Now, how do we mitigate all of this? How do we find solutions? Because like I say, we're not here to stop travel. We're not here to say you can't go there and you can't do this. That's not what anything's about in safety. It is always about finding that solution. It's about doing that assessment of the risk and putting some control mitigation in place, as we're all very familiar with in all other aspects of what we do in the workplace, that sometimes we just forget to do it when it comes to the travel elements, because like I said earlier, it is a little bit out of sight, out of mind. They might send us a nice picture of somewhere in the sun or the snow, but are we actually considering everything we need to do? Are we checking the security threat level of the country that we're sending people to? Have we checked it before we send them, and keep checking it before we send them so we have the most up-to-date information? Do they know they can check in online and find the most up-to-date information? You know, they can even follow the Foreign Office on Facebook and get the most up-to-date information that they might need. Have we put in place the medical clearance that they might need? And saying all that, to be fair, have we actually considered the hierarchy of control? Have we actually considered virtual meetings and not going? But like I say, I'm not here to take the fun away from travel, but have we looked at the alternatives? Have we looked at everything that we should be considering as an employer that has to do risk assessment, that is sending people out into the world? Now, one of the first things we can consider when we're abroad, can't we, is transportation safety. Are we assessing the different risks? You know, if we're hiring a car, which to be fair, I tend to do if I'm outside of a city centre, I tend to hire a car. But are we aware of the local driving conditions? Am I going to be able to find fuel? Can I get fuel? Have I got a payment method for my fuel? And being, you know, somebody who is a bit more security conscious, can I find a well-lit car park to where I'm going? Is where I'm going safe? So if we are self-driving, if we are hiring that car, can we make sure we understand what the local traffic conditions are? Can we avoid driving outside of major cities at night? You know, if we know it's somewhere particularly hazardous, can we plan to travel during daylight hours? We should perform our vehicle checks before we go anywhere. We should know that from national travel though as well, shouldn't we? We should avoid driving when we're tired, and that applies to when we land in country or we arrive in country at either end of our journey, whether we're just getting there or whether we're coming back. It might be that we have to, you know, we don't want to, we just want to get to where we're going, or we want to get home when we land back in the country. But if we consider what the safest option is, then yes, for best interest, we might have to book that overnight stay at the hotel. Or we could use pre-arranged airport transport, airport taxis, which is probably the better alternative. But we have to look at the risk. We have to weigh that up and decide which is the best option. As an employer, I would have to say to my, you know, my team, my employee, actually, it's best you stay at the hotel. You know, don't travel until you're well rested. As an individual, I know that, you know, my personal preference would be to, like I say, be wherever I need to be, either at my hotel or at my home. But if I'm thinking about it, if I've got that reasonable employer in my ear, on my shoulder, saying, you want to do the right thing, book the hotel or book the travel. Don't drive while you're tired. Don't do it, especially if you've landed at the other end and you're on unfamiliar roads and you've got unfamiliar local traffic laws. So we have to consider that element if we're self-driving. If we're not, if we're getting taxis, if we're getting pre-booked transport, then have we pre-booked them? Have we got those we know we can rely on, we can trust? We've pre-booked them. We've perhaps assessed the risks of using local drivers. If we're in a hotel, we might ask them to book it for us because they will know the most reputable local taxi drivers for us to use. And they'll make sure that we're using those metered and licensed taxis as well. Is it possible to travel by train? Train is known to be a very safe mode of transport when we're actually abroad, and probably more reliable than here, to be fair. So are we using train? Are we making the most of those? Are we considering health management? So have we ensured that our teams, our staff have the awareness? Have they had their vaccinations? Have they got their medication? We've already seen that 90% of those people that suffered with malaria hadn't taken their medication as prescribed, as required, because, like we said earlier, The study found they were either a little bit forgetful, they just weren't thinking, or they just didn't have the right information. They weren't fully briefed. Perhaps if they were more fully briefed, they wouldn't have been so quick to forget. So how have we arranged that? How have we made sure they've had their pre-travel checks, they've had their vaccinations in plenty of time, in advance, they've got their medication? Do they understand about waterborne illnesses? Do they understand about having freshly cooked food and avoid food that's been stored in a warm place? Are they aware of this? As employers, just like we do with everything else, we have a duty to make sure we're giving people the information, that we're giving them the training, the information, the instruction, not necessarily the supervision from the other side of the world, but we're giving them what they need. So we're giving them all this pre-planning advice. Do they know about Legionnaire's disease? Do they know to flush taps and showers? I imagine there are many safety professionals out there who go to hotels and think, oh my gosh, I'm at the end of a corridor in this hotel, I best flush my shower. There are, when you talk to them, there's lots of us. But have we thought about that? Because we don't want to be inhaling that mist and developing those waterborne illnesses. Do the employees know? Do those travelling know that they should have a printout of their medication, from the healthcare provider? Have they checked the regulations for if that medication's allowed where they're actually going? Have they got the generic name of the medication printed on there in case they need to access it whilst they're abroad? So have they got that? And again, have they got those pre-existing conditions that we might need to consider? Have we got this checklist in place that talks us through this process, that reminds us of these things before they actually go anywhere? One of the other things we might want to consider for people that are traveling is the accommodation that they're actually going to be staying in. Has the accommodation been considered before they actually depart? If we think back to James in our opening story, he got there. Yes, his hotel had been booked there through a third party, but it hadn't been vetted, the hotel. It didn't have any fire escapes. The security was a bit lax. It really wasn't all that good. But have we actually done that? And we can use reputable travel agents, we can book with known hotel chains, and we can check locations on Google Earth, Google Maps before we actually travel. We can make sure we've got that information. We can provide our teams information on being vigilant in public areas, park in well-lit areas, for example, again, near the hotel entrances, making sure we've got guaranteed reservations. So if we turn up late and it's after dark, we know our reservation is guaranteed. We're not going to be turned away because the hotel is full. Have we considered where we want to be in the hotel? This, I have to admit, is not something I had considered, to be fair, until I think I did a session with, I think it was Cardinus Risk, when it would have been a long time ago now, many years ago, but they were talking about don't go on the ground floor because, your windows are easier to access from outdoors, but try not to go over floor 5, because if you're in an older building, you might be reliant on the fire rescue ladders being able to reach you in an emergency. And to be honest, I didn't have that on my radar until I had done that session with them. And now I'm thinking about that now. So have we considered these elements? Have we considered these things before we're actually traveling abroad? Are we checking the rooms when we get there? Still thinking about our accommodation safety, but have we checked the rooms are safe? Have we checked the windows are actually locked, that they're not easily accessible from the outdoors if we've got an escape route that runs by them? We're making sure that we're not letting people into our room without knowing who they actually are. Female travellers may consider rooms away from lifts and stairwells, for example, so that they're avoiding being caught by surprise by a person that are exiting a lift or hiding in the stairwell, so not ideal. If you have your room key, then have it with you, but don't display it. So don't have your room number on display to the world. And make sure you are familiar with the fire escapes. How often do you just go into your hotel room, throw your stuff down? You don't necessarily look at the sign on the back of your door that says, go that way for your fire escape. But have you actually told your travellers that maybe that's a good idea? Maybe they should be thinking of this and why they should be thinking about that. If there is an emergency and there is a fire and the hotel corridor is filling up with smoke, Well, really, have they considered how far away from they are from a fire rescue, a fire escape? So all these little nuggets of information, have we actually put this in a pre-travel security checklist, a pre-travel briefing for them? Are we briefing our team on how to protect their personal security? Are we making them aware of things such as protecting their belongings in public spaces like bars and restaurants and pool areas? Keep items in view or in touch where you can reach them. Avoid walking alone in less travelled areas, things that seem really, we take for granted and we think, well, obviously, but sometimes when we're away, when we're in different places and it's interesting and or we're trying to just keep up with the world on our phones, as most people do. They walk with their heads down these days, just catching up with their friends and their family that they're away from. But are they aware of the area that they're in? Are they aware if they've strayed off somewhere off the beaten track? So we need to remind people, just keep vigilant, keep aware. Don't stop at demonstrations. Don't stop at demonstrations and events or gatherings to observe or take photos, because those situations, those demonstrations can very, very quickly escalate into something a little bit more serious or a little bit more sinister that we don't want to be caught up in. But again, as an employer, have we told them that? Have we told our employees? Have we given them the information? Have we provided that? Have we made them aware? Have we advised our teams or given them the briefing or cheat sheet or gone through a risk assessment with them before they depart, just to remind them of being aware of local customs, for example, potential cultural risks, the dress codes that might be in place for maybe female travellers, for example, dressing more conservatively? Have we thought about reminding our employees not to discuss travel arrangements in earshot of strangers? Criminals might overhear certain sensitive details such as hotel names or flight times or meeting locations, and that can make travelers much more vulnerable to theft and scams, or even, like we said earlier, in Nigeria, we have kidnappings in certain areas and high risk areas. We want to maintain, a positive relationship with our staff, but we need to give them information. We need to make them feel in control so that they have the ability to make their decisions, to act on the information that they've been given. They need to be very aware of their environments, to be making sure that we are reminding them of that. Do we know where our employees are actually going? So yeah, we've heard that they're going to go and meet, Bill from that company there over in France or wherever, but do we know any more than that? Do we actually know the location of where they're going? Do we know the site that they're traveling to? Do we know who their emergency contact is when they're there? Who's their host? Have we got a bit of a plan in place of how often they're going to check in? Have we got key contact information that they can use when they get there, so that they know who to contact in the event of an emergency? Do they know to take copies of important documents? As businesses, we should also have copies of their important documents, such as their passport and their travel plans and where they're staying and what their flight is and when they're planning to get there. So we should have all this planned, all this documented before anybody leaves the office, before they go off on their travels. When we're thinking about where our employees are going, when I've created risk assessments or travel packs in the past, I've always included as many contact details as possible. And that includes, the British Embassy and medical support contacts, their travel insurance details, or a specialist travel service if they're using one. Before anybody goes anywhere, then, we all take for granted our mobile phones these days, don't we? But have they ensured they have international roaming switched on? Do they have the correct data? Do they have the correct charger? There's nothing worse than thinking that you're all prepared and you've got all your details and it's all great, it's all on your trusty tech, and then finding when you get there that none of it works. It's no good to you because, well, you've not got data, you've not got roaming, you've not got a charger. So have we got the information that we need? Have we got everything loaded onto our phones? Have we checked the networks before we got there? Is it reliable? Do we need to get another SIM card when we land so that we actually have local connection. So these again are things that we can consider before anybody even departs, before anybody even leaves. Have we got some emergency planning in place? Do our employees, do our staff know what to do in an emergency? Do they know the local emergency numbers, for example? Is that in our cheat sheet, in our travel pack, in our risk assessment even? Don't forget to include that kind of information in your pre-travel prep. Maybe have a refresher of run, hide, tell, wait principles, which we've not seen for a while, but we all went through it quite some time ago, didn't we? But have we had a refresher? Because some of these instances are more common in other countries. Have we ensured that we do have comprehensive travel insurance in place? And it might even be that we look at having a travel risk management company engaged. I think one I've used in the past was International SOS. There's various ones out there that you can have a look at, and they are very good, and they will offer with evacuations and medical emergencies and assistance if required. So do have a look at those. Have contingency plans, have those in place. What if travel is interrupted or disrupted? What are we going to do? Have we got the funds for somebody to stay in another hotel, to go somewhere else? How are we going to manage any contingency? What is our plan? What is really key is that we remember that we have a legal duty of care. It's not just a case of out of sight and out of mind. We have to make sure that we are integrating business travel safety and risk assessment into corporate policy from the outset. Often I will go into organisations, and it is one of the questions I ask when I'm doing safety audits or I'm looking at their safety management systems, and I say, do you do international travel? And I'll say, yeah. But often there won't be anything more than that. They'll be like, yeah, so-and-so goes wherever, and they go wherever. But then we have to sit down and go, well, actually, how are we managing that? How are we making sure that we're ensuring their safety? How do we make sure that we're integrating that business travel safety into our organisations? So let's end with a different story. Let's end with a positive. So James at the beginning, he was having a rough old time when he went off to Nigeria. He was working for the manufacturing company, wasn't he? And he was going to be there for 10 days, and he'd had nothing put in place. He was really struggling. But let's end our story today with Amira. Now, Amira is a project manager for a UK-based energy consultancy, and she has been assigned to Brazil. She's going on a trip to Brazil to oversee a client handover for a renewable energy infrastructure project. Her trip is going to be 7 days, and she's going to have site visits and stakeholder meetings while she's there. Now, she's in a very, very different position to James, because she is having 2 weeks prior to departure a briefing with her safety coordinator. She has received a destination-specific risk assessment, a travel risk assessment. She has received her health and vaccination requirements. She has received cultural and security briefings. Copies of her travel insurance policy and emergency assistance contacts have been provided to her as well. The company that she works for, they have a clear international travel policy. They vet all their accommodation and transport providers. They have a check-in protocol, so that requires Amira to confirm safe arrival at her various destinations. And they have a 24/7 emergency helpline provided by a global assistance partner, as I've just mentioned. Amira also, one step further, actually has a company-approved app, which provides real-time safety alerts for the location she's in. It allows her to quickly signal for help if needed, and she logs in daily wellbeing checks with her UK-based manager. Now, while Amira was away, one evening there were local protests erupted near her hotel. Amira received a geo alert through the app and had a call from the travel support team with advice to remain inside and avoid certain areas. Her local driver, who had also been pre-vetted and briefed, adjusted the next day's route to avoid any disruption. Now, when she came back from her trip to Brazil, Amira completed a debrief. So she had a debrief to capture any learning points that she had encountered. Her feedback was used to improve the risk profile of Brazil for further travel of any employees that were going there. And she had a brief wellbeing check-in with her manager as well. So at the end of the day, unlike James, Amira did actually feel safe and informed and supported throughout the trip. The client relationship was actually therefore strengthened because of her professionalism and her confidence during the trip. And she went on to volunteer for many other future international projects. But it's a very, very different story to James, who was not supported. And like we said at the beginning, James is not a unique story. So I'd like to thank you on that note for listening to this presentation on international travel. And I think the key takeaway is it's not being afraid to travel. I mean, if we saw at the beginning, only 20% of people were happy to travel for work internationally at the moment. But if we can make sure people are prepared to travel, then hopefully we can only increase that number. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Heather, for a great presentation. Brought back lots of memories. I've never travelled internationally for work, but I have travelled in the UK, and some of the horror stories that me and my colleagues used to go through in the early days, like turning up at your hotel and it's booked
Yeah,
for the following night. Someone being dropped off at an unmanned station and the last train has already gone. That kind of thing. So I think there's a big emphasis on the individual as well, making sure they've got that information and checking the information that they've been given rather than just assume it's all right. I think complacency sets in when you travel. You jump in the car, you
yes.
don't have a map. It's the middle of winter, you don't have anything to scrape your window with because you're in a hire car. And
Yeah, absolutely. And when I was putting it together, I was thinking, it's like you say, a lot of it is applicable to here as well. It's not just international travel. A lot of it is applicable to any travel that we do on company business as well.
yeah, I learned to get a lot more aware and to consider things. There was once I was driving back from the northeast and the petrol station was shut and I didn't have enough to go back or forwards.
Yep.
So it's making sure you've got plenty of fuel to get you all the way home.
Yeah, it's being prepared, and that's the key thing, being prepared to travel and knowing
Yeah.
that we should be planning in advance and not just hopping off and doing whatever it is that would be nice to do,
Yeah.
but actually making sure we've got that
I
preparedness.
think that's what happened in the middle. First of all, you're quite vigilant and checking everything. And then because we used to have a travel person, so you just assumed everything was right, or booking into a hotel, but they didn't tell you that there's no parking. So you're at an
Yeah,
NCP
yeah,
and it's 10 o'clock at night. And so translate that to overseas with all the different risks that you've mentioned must be really stressful for some people.
absolutely, definitely, yeah. And I have seen the good stories and I have seen the bad stories. So it's trying to convince a lot of people that, yeah, it's not just all fun and games, that we do need to take it quite seriously as employers and not just forget about people when they
Yeah.
walk out of the office. And I think that's half the battle I tend to find when I'm talking with organizations. They don't see it as being all that serious. They just see it as something that we just all get on and do.
Yeah.
If we manage to be lucky enough to bag ourselves a trip overseas, then good for us.
And
So
then when you add in the lone working aspect, if you're working alone, and whether, you could just
yeah,
go and disappear in a different country and no one would know until you didn't come back on the day you were due back in the
exactly.
office
Yeah,
at the
so
worst.
making sure, yeah, you've got those key contacts and you've got a check-in procedure as well. Otherwise, it's like you say, yeah, how do you know you've even got to the country or even got to your hotel?
Yeah,
So,
we used to have a lone working alert on our phones and I accidentally set off the emergency button once and 3 directors phoned me,
gosh.
which was excellent.
Yeah, it
Like,
worked.
so sorry.
You
I
did, you
didn't.
tested the system. All is good. So, so
Right,
brilliant.
We don't have any questions from anyone. So what top
Okay.
tips could you probably leave us with before we sign off for today? Or any final thoughts?
It's being prepared. So it's looking for the information. So even having a checklist in place and just making it country specific. So having a checklist in place and saying, is this applicable to the country I'm traveling to? Applicable or not applicable. If I think about when I do the assessments for the states, for example, what's applicable down south in America might not be
Yeah,
applicable to the northern climes and the snow and the storms that we get further north. So it's making it applicable to where we're going. And like with all safety elements, you can have a checklist, but then you don't want to become too blinkered.
yeah.
In the Foreign Office website for everything. So any country specific risk assessment, starting off on the UK Foreign Office website, that breaks it down really, really well because it'll tell you what you need to know for entry requirements. So, for example, there was a new one last week for Egypt, making sure that your passport photo matched the almost gender look you were going for. So it's just
Ah, that's interesting.
yes, that was a couple of weeks ago, last week on for Egypt. So making sure you're up to date on those alerts. They released one last week on taxes in Turkey. So following that information, making sure you're logging on to those government websites and checking each country that you might need to, and checking it while you're there as well, because events change.
Yeah,
Things are always changing.
that's fantastic. We've just had a really nice message from Reem saying thank you for the highly informative and insightful presentation. As a safety manager, I found the key takeaways extremely relevant, particularly the strategies for risk assessment and emergency preparedness. The practical advice and real world examples were invaluable. Great work, much appreciated.
Oh, that's nice. There you go.
Oh, that's from Kashif.
Fabulous. Thank
That's
you
nice
very much.
feedback, nice positive note to end on today. So thank you very much, Heather. Really do appreciate you giving up your time as well as being a member of the committee, the chair of the
Yep.
Yorkshire and Humber branch. So thank you everyone for coming. I will be uploading the recording onto the IIRSM member resource hub. So if you'd like to refer it to any colleagues, I'll pop the link on the LinkedIn group and I'll pop it on the WhatsApp group as well. So I'd like to wish everyone a good afternoon or a good evening wherever you are in the world today. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.